For my literary analysis, I want to talk about the Sonseria Tate quote where she says, "You can leave home all you want, but home will never leave you." And this quote is I think this quote is so interesting because it can be applied in so many different aspects of literature. It can be applied in a negative way to a certain character. It can be applied in a positive way to a certain character. It can be ambiguous somewhere else. Just the concept of home, and the concept of belongingness for a character is so important and so interesting to see how it can change throughout literature and different stories we may read. So I thought about that, and I thought about two pieces in which the idea of home is very different. And the first one is a novel that we looked at and that I read for this course, which was The Kite Runner. And it was an absolutely, for me, moving book. I absolutely loved it. And one of the main things, there were two main themes that stick out to me. One of them was about redemption, while the other one was about home and your true place of belonging. So, starting off with the concept of home, Amir, who is this main character, he's grown up in Afghanistan. And for him, he has a good relationship with his father and with his friend. But eventually, we see a lot of violence and a lot of struggles going on with the country. You know, he eventually has to break ties with his friend because of some harrowing events. He's constantly living under the impression he wants to impress his father. There's political turmoil all around him. There's violence, and he eventually leaves. Him and his father, they go to America. He's basically left his home country because of Soviet intervention and all the political turmoil that's going on. But I think this is a very good representation of how home will never leave you, because I think he was destined to go back to Afghanistan. And I think somewhere in his heart he knew it too when he left Afghanistan. Like, he wasn't taking all of him with himself. There was part of him still in Afghanistan in his home. And years later, he did actually go back to Afghanistan. There was something for him there. And I think home never left him because home was where his childhood and his strongest relationship came from, which is with Hassan, his best friend from his childhood. And he goes back to Afghanistan. He, in his mind, or in my mind rather, he redeems his broken relationship with his best friend by taking in his friend's son and adopting him. And he finally confronts the bully, Asaf, that he had to face as a child. So it was almost as closure for him going back home and kind of seeing events or parts of his childhood in a different time. And I don't think that part of his home ever left him, that need for redemption, that need for closure, and the way his relationships and events built him, that was always in Afghanistan and will always be. And no matter where he moves, all those facts of his life lie in his true home of Afghanistan. So there's always part of him there. And the second literature piece I wanted to compare that to was The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, a book I read a few years ago, and it moved me to tears. And the concept of home in this book is very different because it's a memoir about this girl, Jean, who has never had a proper home in her life. You know, her parents are always in trouble with the law. They're extremely dirt poor. She's constantly moving place to place, whether it be some broken down house in a sewer somewhere, whether it be in her grandmother's guest bedroom. She's never had a true or proper home. And eventually, she leaves her family. She moves on past her alcoholic dad and her mentally ill mother and moves to New York, settles down there, gets a job, helps some of her siblings get a job and settle down as well. But it's very hard to view her as having a home from that book. You don't see a place where she came from. You don't see a place where she belongs, where she can trace herself back to, because there never really was a place like that. And going back to the quote where it says, "But home will never leave you," it was hard for me to first apply this to the book, considering she never had a home. She never had a place she could call home. I think her home, as cheesy as it may sound, lied within herself. All she needed was herself. The only reason she stayed on her feet throughout her childhood was because she had to take care of herself, not because her parents or siblings did anything for her. The only reason that she made it in New York, became a writer, settled down, had a family, was because she had everything she needed within herself. So in a way, it's almost as if she is her own home. She's all she needs. There was nothing really that had to build her or have a lasting effect on her, or something she needed to come back to. Unlike in The Kite Runner, when for Amir, there was stuff in his home he had to come back to. There were components of his home that built him to the person he was, external factors. But for the Glass Castle, for Jean, there wasn't anything like that. In a way, she is her own home. She never had a place to belong. She just had to go forward with no beginning almost. But she did reach a point where she could settle down and she could make it. I have definitely grown a lot as a learner and as someone who likes to look at and analyze literature because of this class. I think the main way I've grown is I have learned about new lenses and new perspectives through which I can view literature. I've learned more about lenses such as the postmodern lens, post-structuralist lens, Marxist lens. I've learned about the different types of literatures that exist and how, each one can carry a different meaning. And because my perspective has been widened as to how you can view literature and how literature can be written, I know I'll definitely be more open-minded now, kind of going into the world and kind of look as I continue to look at literature and as I continue to analyze literature. I definitely think the most important idea that came up during this entire course was the idea that in America as a country, the outside can be seen as bad. People from different countries, media from different countries can commonly be looked down upon, and there's a lot of struggles, people from other places have to go through just to have their voice heard. And we don't just see, we learn about firsthand experiences of this through the recounts of people such as Amy Tan and how she wrote about it in the Joy Luck Club. We see it through Anita Desai, and her talking about her being Indian American. We see it through Ernest Gaines writing about the issues that relate to the Black community and to civil rights. We see it through Jamaica Kincaid and the Caribbean struggles. So I think the important idea is to recognize that non-Anglo cultures can be seen as inferior, even if that's not true. And it's important that we recognize how this mentality came to be and that we work towards overcoming it. I think definitely there isn't even a question of are there ideas or evidence that support my system, when the entire class was about learning all the different cultures of literature that are out there, and almost all of them pertain to struggles trying to fit in being of a different culture. So we see multiple first-hand accounts from multiple different cultures of people saying sometimes being different is hard. Being non-American, being non-Anglo, being non-white has its struggles, has its prejudices. And that was just, I think, the most relevant to what's going on today and is the most important thing to come up in this course. I think many people will disagree with what I say, although it's not common. A lot of people won't believe the fact that even to this day, there are still struggles with discrimination and racism and prejudice. And I would like to argue against that, because even today we still hear stories of non-white people, non-American people being treated not as fairly as white people or American people or privileged people would be. And this does extend beyond race and ethnicity. It goes to gender, it goes to the LGBT community. And I've also gained a better understanding of that through learning about queer theory, learning about the feminism theory. So it's definitely relevant today. I don't see the disagreements as to how it's not applicable, because these events, these struggles are still going on. They still need to be worked towards to be overcame. Beyond this classroom, I know that everything I've learned in this course will definitely be applied. My knowledge on just social issues, like I mentioned, when it comes to marginalized groups, has greatly been extended, and I have a better understanding of, why do people face the struggles that they do? Where did this come from? I have a better understanding of the history behind it. I know more pivotal people who are important to that discussion, such as all the authors we've learned about. And I have more resources now that I can utilize to better educate myself on these types of issues. So I've learned more on the social justice and social aspect of things, but I've also learned more about just literature itself. And as I mentioned earlier, different ways to analyze literature, different lenses I can use. And going into college, just going into life, I'm still going to be looking at literature, all different forms, all different media. And I will be using the wider perspective I have and the more open mind I have now towards literature to analyze and to understand what a literature piece is trying to convey. And now I have more of a want to explore non-American literature. I want to know more about the different cultures and the different types of literature that they offer. So overall, I think this course has definitely opened my mind and taught me so many things about different cultures, different literatures, and I'm grateful to have that knowledge now.